So wait a minute.
The definition there is permission to depart from the literal requirements of this ordinance.
Okay.
Okay, and David is suggesting variance, an area variance or a use variance as the context may permit.
And then area variance and use variance are already defined.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, okay, I'm confused.
It doesn't change.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. 2.2, on the amendment. This is sort of the, essentially tightening up the code. Most lawyers, if the lawyer who drafted the code was here, he or she, I'm sure, would tell you that the idea is that any use not specifically permitted, and permitted is not just as of right, but also special permits and things like that, but that any use not specifically permitted is prohibited. And all we're doing here is saying that unequivocally. So that's what 2.2A does. Is making it crystal clear that any use not specifically set forth as a permitted use in any zoning district shall be prohibited, and moreover, the fact that if something is permitted in one district shall not be construed to mean an intent by the town board that that particular use is permitted elsewhere. So unless a use is permitted in a particular district, it's not allowed. And if it is permitted, but only in one district, it's only permitted in one district. What you don't want is somebody to be able to say, well, it's permitted in District A, so it's an allowed use, so I want to do it in B. Because that was almost assuredly not the intention of the town board when they did their district stuff. So again, all we're doing here is not meant to be any kind of substantive change. It's just tightening things up to give ultimately the town board the benefit of what it thought it was doing when it passed the law.
Okay. So when I look at section 4.1 of the existing zoning law, so to replace the present title of such section, which is general application with the words, any use not specifically permitted is prohibited. That's what that's the heading.
Right?
Okay.
Right now, it has general application.
Right. And we're replacing that with any use not specifically permitted is prohibited. Okay.
Now what section 4.4 does, or what B is in boy does of 2.2, which essentially intentionally omits existing section 4.4, which is on present page 11 of the existing code. Excuse me. What 4.4 does right now, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially it says, even though we all thought that if the use wasn't, even though we thought what we were doing here is to say that if the use is not allowed, it's prohibited. What 4.4 is saying is if the use isn't there, we can visit the issue with the planning board. And then the planning board can go to the town board, make a recommendation for a zoning amendment and so forth. It doesn't make sense given what we're trying to do. They can do that anyway. You can petition, you can get a variance, you can apply for a variance, or you can actually go for a zoning amendment. But all this does is muck up the notion of whether or not we really meant it when we said, unless it's permitted, expressly permitted, it's prohibited.
Right.
It creates an ambiguity.
Right.
We are taking no substantive rights away by deleting that.
So basically, all you're going to do is delete all of section 4 and put intentionally omitted
Right.
as the heading. Because it conflicts and, as you say, mucks up everything with the special uses, permits and such.
Correct.
But you're leaving in 4.2 and 4.3? I just want to make
Yeah,
sure
yeah.
that they were going to still be there.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
so then
And that, from a drafting standpoint, just so you know, so everybody knows, the reason that we don't, another way to do this, if we were taking out 4.4, for example, would be to take it out and then renumber 4.5 as 4.4 and 4.6 as 4.5. That, especially when you don't have an electronic document to go back and check, can be a real problem. Because then if we miss something, and there's a reference in here that says, you know, you have the rights of 4.6, but there is a part, because there won't be, you have the rights of 4.5, and 4.5 isn't 4.5 anymore, it's really 4.4. The intentionally omitted convention of drafting allows you to basically not worry about those kind of issues.
okay, gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
All right, so everybody's in agreement with 2.2, amendment to Article 4. For B, Section 4.4, we're gonna basically remove the entire section and replace it with intentionally omitted.
That's
Vince?
4.1.
I'm sorry, yes. 4. Yes. Barbara? Barbara? Okay, all right.
Okay, now we are at section 2.3 in the amendment, which is on page 5, starts on page 5. And A of 2.3, I'm sorry, B, not touching A. B is, I think the idea would be, was to say farm use. And customary buildings and structures, which we don't need to do because we define farm use to be non-farm buildings. So what I did with B was I deleted the existing text and I simply said farm use, which is a defined term. I didn't know, for example, what a truck garden was. But all this, you know, we grow trucks there or what? But our definition of farm use picks this up. You don't have any ambiguity there. You don't have a term like truck gardens. It doesn't, to some people at least, doesn't mean anything. And you use with 2 words what is, 35 or so words now. So that's what that change is about.
So you're saying B is just going to say farm use?
Correct. That's 2.3A on the draft.
And it'll be now 6.1B. In the,
Right, so what this says, just so we're on the same, so what it says is, when you're reading these things, it's, so it just says, hereby amended so as to delete the text of clause B in its entirety, and to substitute the words farm use. So you still have a B, it's not like you need to renumber anything, but all that text goes away, which is just farm use anyway, and now we call it farm use.
Which we already defined earlier.
Correct.
When we refined that, which is all encompassing of what considered farms. Okay.
Now, remember, before I talk about this next thing, that a permitted use, unless, and you guys don't really do that here, I don't think, the way that most zoning ordinances work is they categorize by district the uses that are allowed, what's called as of right. In other words, you don't have to get you still have to get a building permit and things like that, but you don't have to go to the planning board or anybody else to get permission to do it. So if it's as of right, you don't even have to go to the planning board. A special permit use is presumed to be allowed in the district, but by definition, it typically, if you're going to allow it, and it would typically be administered by the planning board, but it doesn't have to be, conditions will attach. These conditions are found to be not, the nature of the use is such that, yeah, we're gonna at least think about letting it in here as opposed to prohibiting it. But the nature of it, or maybe the nature combined with where it is, are such that in order to allow it, we have to impose certain safeguards in the form of conditions. So typically, with respect, if you look at what we did in D, which is on touch, 6.1D, you see that you've got sort of some animal type uses. And this goes through those types of uses, whether they're mink farms or whatever. And then goes on to say, Provided, however, that though their pens, the buildings, the runways have to be at least 100 feet from the adjoining property line. That's leaving aside whether that does it or not, lengthwise, but we're not trying to touch anything like that. The reason that's in there is that because of that, because of the nature of the use, which can either, with animals, can either be noise or, it can be three things. It can be noise, it can be odor, or with some of these wild, like mink things, it could be a safety issue. So it's typical either to do this two ways. It's typical to either say, to make those kind of uses a special use, a special permit use, and then you specifically can say, provided that, there's no noise more than such and such times for your dog kennel or whatever it is. Or you actually define the use, say, yes, you can do it as of right without a special permit, but the definition includes being X feet away from the neighbor's property. So that, with that background, we come to E, which I talked about last week, and which some people took issue with, and I don't care, I'm just here to play Scrivener. But what E is, and what B as in boy does in 2.3, is it simply deletes, because right now, it deletes private wildlife reservations. And so the question is, do you want to leave it there? Remember, this is as of right, so nobody even gets, you can't attach a condition to this. So maybe you want to leave it, maybe you want to omit it the way that I did. Maybe you want to make it maybe you want to don't touch it. Maybe you want to say, okay, somebody might want to have, tigers running around or whatever. But they've got to be in compliance. Another way to do it would be say, yes, that's okay, but you've got to have permits for everything. Yes, you can have the tigers or however you find private wildlife refuge, but you've got to have all kinds of permits. That would be a typical way. Right now, these tigers could be illegal, and it would be a legal use as of right. And there's not even any kind of setback for it. So the question is, and it's not a Gasperman issue, but we're in here anyway. What do you want to do?
David, I think it's not a gas issue. We are going to do the comprehensive plan that we're all aware of this now, and it will be revisited at the time of the comprehensive plan. That would be the way I go on it.
Trish, Dennis? Mark?
I'm not sure what she's saying.
Well, we either leave it in or
Are we going to delete this?
No, we're not going to touch it.
we're going to ignore it.
Until, and if we want to revisit it, it'll be at another time.
But I will say that this is relevant, because as a person who studied biology, I'm amazed how many people have wolves and how many people have tigers, that we went out and visited them in college, and they're all over the place. It's really amazing. So it is something to go back to from a sense of safety, because recently there was
This is in a residential district,
Right.
and, if you've got some 3-year-old kid,
I mean, you've got Bengal tigers, and you decide to shoot yourself, and they all, and let them all out, but the guy in Ohio did it already, we've got a problem. So let's just leave that and address that with the comprehensive plan.
okay. Next up is C, which refers to clause D as in David of subsection 2 of section 6.2. And, okay, I talked about this last week. This is, I believe, non-substantive, just creating, I believe the way this is drafted right now, essentially, at best is meaningless, and at worst is very dangerous. The following requirements are in addition to or in place of requirements listed elsewhere. So clearly what the draftsperson intended was that these are in addition to. If you go through and look, and as I have, each one of those, there's nothing there that would make sense otherwise. But by saying or in place of, it sort of vitiates the entire clause. So, okay, it's in place of everything else. This is in place of requirements listed elsewhere in this ordinance. So nothing else. You don't. It's totally. It can't mean that. And so all I did
Basically kills all your regs.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're just going to want to delete or in place of, and then add the.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe I left the article out. But yes, so thank you. Good catch. So, yeah, all we're saying, so that it said, so instead of reading are in addition to or in place of, it'll now just say are in addition to, which has to be what was intended. So we're simply deleting one place of.
Because those are those four little words that you write
Right.
out all your regs.
Right.
May I ask David, going back, 6.2D, mining and excavation under 1,000 tons per year, see exclamation in section 7.2.8.4. Is that gonna, do we need to be concerned about that, the intended ban?
If it not, if no, because we defined mining, this to say mining in the drill. We would be concerned otherwise.
Just
since
checking.
we changed the definition. Okay. Okay, clause C of section 6.5. Farm structures was not defined. And these are, what we're talking about here are exceptions from otherwise applicable height restrictions. So we've deleted farm structures because who knows what, and we said instead, we're substituting the words on-farm barns and silos.
With no limit. So basically,
Right.
instead of saying farm structures, you're gonna say on-farm barns and silos,
And maybe-
colon, no limit.
Right, and maybe we want to say, instead of on-farm barns and silos, maybe we want to say on-farm barns, comma, similar structures and silos. So that if something doesn't happen to be a barn, but, you know, just a.
Well, I mean, equipment shed is not a barn.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, so
No.
we'll say similar structures and,
And all we're here talking about is the maximum height.
right.
So, yeah, so it's
And
very
and
limited.
basically, we're allowing
Yeah, unlimited.
unlimited height, we're
Right.
just making sure that we
We go-
define what a farm structure is.
Right.
Right, that's fine.
I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay. Now we get into the guts. 2.4. 6A, a new 6A. Now again, there's two ways to do this. We could have put a 6A in, which is what we did, so that we don't have to worry about tying up all our other definitions. Or we could instead, and what I normally would have done, is go into the very last thing and have a new section 23. But logically, it didn't make sense because the existing is 22. But logically, to me, it didn't make sense to have something like that at the very end after we've talked about effective date and things like that. But again, this is just a drafting convention. We could have done it a different way and say this is new Article 24 instead of 6A.
So you're gonna go from, at the end
From
of
6 to
section 5.5,
No, 6.
6.
then the next one's going to be section 6.
Yes, and it tells you.
We have, we have section 6.
So that's section 6, so
Yeah.
there's, section 6A is going to be
6A,
right
right
here.
after.
And we actually, in the small print here, we actually say that clearly in where it goes, so as to insert the following new 6A immediately after the present text, section 6.5, which is the last section of 6, and immediately prior to present Article 7. So there's no question, no ambiguity where this thing goes in. Okay? Now, once we get to this new 6A, the lion's share of these are defined terms. And most of them, in fact, all of them, I think I talked about last week, none of them, to my knowledge, and none of them, as far as my intent goes, none of these things would impact or affect or preclude any of the various uses that people expressed concern about last week. The so-called, heavy industrial uses or high impact uses. These are all focused on
here we go, word by word, line by line.
Yep, I
Because this is why we're here.
Yeah, okay. So conceptually, schematically, before we get to the definitions, what this does is first it says, we told you before that the only legal uses in this town are uses that are specifically articulated elsewhere in the code. And that if it's not specifically articulated, it's not allowed, it's prohibited. We're now going beyond that. That's the belt. And suspenders is, we already told you that, but to make it crystal clear, there are certain uses that we want you to know are explicitly prohibited, separate and apart from the other ones that, and those are what these are. So the first one, okay, so sorry. So that's what 6A1 does. We'll go into those definitions, which are in 6.4. Section 6A2 is basically making it clear. What happened is that our friends in the industry thought they were doing something cute by accepting themselves from EX, accepting themselves from the certain definitions of waste. But what they did by that, they accepted themselves at the federal and state level, but by doing that, it allowed regulation, it left regulation with the locality. So this is almost like, you could have put this in that section 1 on the appendix about legal authority. This is saying, by the way, in case anybody forgot this, we have the right to do this because these aren't defined as waste there. Anything that's not, by definition, the locality gets to define as waste and regulate as waste. So that's what that's kind of lawyer stuff, section 6A2. 6A3 I also talked about. Am I going too fast?
Yeah, I thought we were going to go line by line.
Okay. You mean like read it out loud?
Yeah,
Okay. Do you want to do that, or?
you can do it, David.
Okay, so starting with 6A2 or 6A?
Just the 6A, the explicit
Okay,
prohibited
all right.
uses.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we've added a new section, 6A, Article 6A, to the zoning code. And it is going to be inserted after existing Article 6 and before existing Article 7. And what section 6A1 does of this draft is it says that the following uses, which are defined in 6A4 below, are hereby expressly and explicitly prohibited in each and every zoning district within the town. And no building or structure shall be created, altered, or erected, and no body of water, land, or building thereon shall be used for any of such uses or activities. The first item, clause A, in the whole, is land application facility.
And these will be defined after you
Okay.
say what they are,
Okay.
right?
Yep, so all of these that I'm mentioning now are defined terms. And I'll read them, and then
Yeah.
when we get to the definitional section, we'll talk about it. Next item, B, natural gas and/or petroleum exploration activities. C, natural gas and/or petroleum extraction activities. D, natural gas and/or petroleum extraction, exploration, or production wastes, disposal / storage facility. E, natural gas and/or petroleum extraction, exploration, or production wastes dump. F, as in Frank. Natural gas compression facility. G, as in girl, natural gas processing facility. H, non-regulated pipelines. That's a defined term. All of these are defined terms. I, underground injection. And J, underground natural gas storage. Okay? And then it just goes on, any condition caused or permitted to exist in violation of this section 6A1 is a threat to public health, safety, and welfare, and is hereby declared and deemed to be a nuisance. Collectively, the above expressly prohibited uses are referred to as explicitly prohibited uses, plural. And any one of the above expressly prohibited uses, which I think I'll capitalize next time through, may be referred to in this law as explicitly prohibited uses, singular. And any combination of more than one such use may also be referred to as explicitly prohibited uses, plural. Okay, so far? Section 6.82. This is a specific prohibition on the extraction, exploration, or production of waste, which again is a defined term which we'll talk about. The town hereby exercises its authority and right, and and we've got a particular statutory reference, to adopt a local law that is consistent with another statutory reference. Such consistency demonstrated by the fact that this local law complies with at least the minimum applicable requirements set forth in the state statute. What this statute essentially does is say, we, the state, are going to pass a law in this area. But you towns are free to go beyond that, as long as you do at least the minimum that we've done, and you may be stricter in this area of waste. And that's what, and we're telling the state, okay, we know we've got the right to do that, and that's what we're doing. This relates to the issue that they got the exclusion from the waste, and so we're going to jump on it and take what they're giving us. It shall be unlawful for any person to produce, store, inject, discard, discharge, dispose, needs a comma, release, or maintain, or to suffer, cause, or permit to be produced, stored, injected, discarded, discharged, disposed, released, or maintained anywhere within the town, and then it's a defined term, any extraction, exploration, or production wastes. Okay?
I have a question for Dave.
Yes? Go ahead, Vince.
In New York State, a hazardous waste can be removed from the hazardous waste stream simply by defining it as something else. For instance, road grime was just an issue this year. Was to prevent somebody, let's say our town highway department, from mining and actually have a business that giving away the grime free, and they were spreading it on the roads to keep the dust down. And in New York State, as with many hazardous wastes, if they can be redefined and removed from the hazardous waste stream simply by calling them something else. And that's my concern here.
When we get, we deal with that specifically, and when we get through the definitions in general, and the definitions of nat gas waste in particular, we pick that up, and I'll take it, when we get there, I'll point out how we've captured that.
Very good, thank you.
Okay. All right. Section 6A3. This is basically telling everybody what's not covered by these prohibitions. So if you look, for example, before we even get to the guts of what's not covered, we have already accepted out basically legal agriculture. Well, let me just go through it.
Yeah.
So the prohibitions set forth above in this section 6A, that's our new article, are not intended and shall not be construed to, X in the whole, prevent or prohibit the right to use roadways in commerce or otherwise for travel, lowercase y in the whole, prevent or prohibit the transmission of natural gas through utility pipes, lines, or similar appurtenances for the limited purpose of supplying natural gas to residents of or buildings located in the town. We talked about that last week. Or Z in the whole, prevent or prohibit the incidental or normal sale, storage, or use of lubricating oil, heating oil, gasoline, diesel fuel, kerosene, or propane in connection with legal agricultural, residential, business, commercial, and other uses within the town, so long as those other uses do not involve, and these are defined terms, but exploration activities, extraction activities, or support activities.
So this is not going to prevent underground storage or anything like that of, say, if Moravido wanted to put in a storage plant? Like if they did.
What is it? I don't know what you mean by storage plant.
Well, like if they did storage of propane underground, or if they did storage of propane or something like that, they're not gonna prevent like what they have down, like you're not familiar with 205, but say a facility, that's a, I guess what I'm trying to get at is trying to ensure that, you know, and I think it is in here, that the gas stations or Moravido, those places can still continue to do the business that they've basically been doing or could locate in this town if they wanted to.
Right.
And this is basically telling us that they could.
Yes, this is the sort of thing, the idea behind this law, and looking at this law, even given what you just said to me, I continue to believe that this law would not prevent that. But that's an example of something where if anybody who is in that business, or might want to be in that business, has this concern, they should say it. And then we can actually say, where we say, shall not prevent or prohibit, including without limitation, blah, blah, blah. So if somebody wants to pop that in, because I think it doesn't change anything anyway, if that business or the lawyer for that business wanted that comfort level, since it's not a change anyway, I wouldn't hesitate to say, yeah, let's put it in. That's not all the time when somebody says, including without limitation, even though 6 lawyers in the room think it's okay, if the 7th lawyer gets comfort by putting a parenthetical in, you do it, and this is the place to do it. So if they wanted that, we would do it.
Okay. Everybody understands that?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Okay, now we're into the definitions. And a lot of these definitions sort of tie into one another. So, but I'll try to tell you where they get used as we go through them. Do you want me to read these out loud too? Excuse me. So our first definition is below regulatory concern. And I know without looking where we use this in the definition of nat gas wastes. And the definition is as follows: radioactive material in a quantity or of a level that is distinguishable from background, as that phrase is defined in 10 CFR section 20.1003, but which is below the regulation threshold established by any regulatory agency otherwise having jurisdiction over such material in town. That comes directly from the federal regulations. What we're doing with this, background is what comes from that regulation. We have to say, we're coming up, there can be radioactive radiation anywhere. One of the problems with the Marcellus shale, as opposed to certain other formations, is that by nature, by its very nature, it is typically radioactive. Where the level of radioactivity and whether every single, so for example, when you put the stuff down and then you bring it back up. First of all, when you drill and you bring the cores up, so you're bringing, you're going all the way down and you're looking at what you're doing. That stuff is at least 50-50 likely to be radioactive. And it's more likely to be radioactive, the more likely that they found what they want. Because it really is the essence of Marcellus. Not all shale is Marcellus. So when you bring just the cores up, for example, those are going to be radioactive at some level. What happened, the reason this is in this law, is what happened is that the biggest problem, the biggest cost for this industry is disposing of the various wastes, whether it's solid waste like drill cores, whether it's blowback and so forth. So that's why they were so happy in Pittsfield to say, yeah, it's free. It's free because you're taking off. It's like, I think it's obvious. It's they would otherwise have to pay to truck that someplace, usually Ohio now. What they were doing in the beginning is, in Pennsylvania, they were coming up to New York and they were paying farmers, who we all know are finding it hard to survive sometimes, and they were paying farmers to accept this stuff, accept this stuff, and spread it over their fields. And they told them it was safe because, in that case it was DEP. DEP wouldn't let us do this if it wasn't safe. So they're spreading all this stuff that is, not potentially, but is almost assuredly radioactive. It's just a question of what level. So what we do with this, to get ahead of ourselves, why we've got this definition, somebody said, well, you can't do that, and then they said, well, it's below a threshold that we don't, we don't have to worry about. There's a threshold that says unless it's, whatever it is, peak up, whatever. So what we're going to use this to say, we're going to say if things are radioactive, even if they are, quote, below regulatory concern. Because we don't want someone to say that's okay because the Fed somewhere said that it's okay to, that's a level of radioactivity that doesn't concern us. It does concern us at the local level. So anyway, long-winded way, and I apologize, but that's what we do with that definition. The next definition is gathering line or production line. Obviously, this is a type of, this refers to conveyances, pipelines specifically. And the definition is as follows. Any system of pipelines and other equipment such as drip stations, vent stations, picking facilities, valve boxes, transfer pump stations, measuring and regulating equipment, yard and station piping, cathodic protection equipment used to move oil, gas, or liquids from a point of production, treatment facility, or storage area to a transmission line, which is exempt from FERC's jurisdiction and which does not meet the definition of a major utility transmission facility under the Public Service Law. What we're doing with this is pipelines generally fall within one of three categories. Certain types and sizes are, the larger ones basically, are governed by the feds and FERC. Certain other types, typically the medium-sized ones, are governed by the state, the Public Service Commission. And then what's left are the little ones, the so-called gathering lines. There is talk right now at the state level about taking over jurisdiction of those. But right now the state is not taking jurisdiction of those, and the localities therefore have jurisdiction. So we are using this definition, essentially it's going to work through several others, but it's basically, we're saying we're not going to touch big pipelines, we're not going to touch FERC pipelines, we're not going to touch state-regulated pipelines. But the little ones that nobody else is touching, we're going to touch.
Question. Drip stations, picking facilities, and cathodic protection equipment. Would you tell me what they are?
A picking facility, the way that they, I don't know what a drip station is, I'll find out is the answer. That's a Helen term. But she researched that fairly exhaustively, so I'll find that out. Pigging, a pig is the way that they both look for leaks. And there's a whole interesting story on that, which I won't get into, but the way they look for leaks, and then sometimes the way they fix the leaks, depends on what the leak is they use pigs. And these pigs aren't pigs. They're essentially robotic cameras. Everything in this industry is very sexy. I mean, fracking is very sexy. It's really good, cool technology. And this is one of those cool technologies. And so they're called pigs, but they go through and they basically run through the pipeline, these little mini robot cameras. And they look and they figure out if there's a leak, and if there's a plug, they figure out what it is and so on. So that's a pigging, generally, a pigging facility.
Should valve boxes be plural?
Yes.
And what's this cathodic?
Cathodic protection equipment is this is another sort of interesting question. These things are made of metal. And whatever kind of metal, it deteriorates and it rusts. And one type of rust protection is you'll see it, some people do this on their pickup trucks. You'll see someone's going to run a little electric line and then ground on it. They think that keeps them from rusting. I don't know if it does or not. But it's basically a rust protection thing where you somehow run some kind of ground. Okay. All right. Next item is injection well. This is going to be used, this is also prohibited use. This, as I said before, the biggest cost for these guys is getting rid of the waste. They tried running it through sewage treatment plants. That didn't work for a whole bunch of reasons. They tried doing all sorts of things. one of the things that they do, not so much in New York right now, but did do a little of, but they do most of it in Ohio for the past spring. They basically drill wells into the ground, or they might not even have to drill them. Sometimes they've got old wells. And they essentially dump these literally millions of gallons of, spent fluid, which itself is radioactive, at least what can be if it comes from Marcellus. Always has, some percentage of the chemicals that came back, has heavy metals, barium, strontium, and things like that are found in the Marcellus. And what are they going to do? They used to put them in pits and things like that, and that didn't work. So now they dump it underground. And so we're using this definition of injection well, so that we're in turn going to prohibit that, so they can't dump it underground in our town. So the definition, which is simple, is a bored, drilled or driven shaft whose depth is greater than the largest surface dimension, or a dug hole whose depth is greater than the largest surface dimension, through which fluids, which may or may not include semi-solids, are injected into the subsurface, and less than 90% of such fluids return to the surface within a period of 90 days. That 90% of fluids returning to the surface, the way that they got their there are a whole bunch, this industry has a whole bunch of exemptions from federal environment and some state environmental protection laws. Most of them, those exemptions predate the so-called Halliburton loophole that most of us know about. That was in 2005. That loophole was basically, that was an exemption from the underground drinking water law. And the way they got around that was they said, they did a couple things with that, but basically what they said is, we're not doing underground injection. It looks like we are, but this is in the drilling context, not the waste disposal context. But that's not what we're doing, because it all comes back up, and we're not leaving anything down there. Well, then they got in trouble because they told somebody else that they should get an exemption from somebody else on surface stuff, because none of it came back. So they sort of caught in between. But what we're saying, we know it doesn't all come back up. And so we're saying, if less than virtually all of it comes back up, that's an underground injection well, and you can't do that here. Okay. Land application facility, I alluded to earlier, that's a site where any of these wastes, which is a defined term, are applied to the soil surface or injected into the upper level of the soil. That's what I mentioned before, just so they can't pay some unsuspecting guy to take their radioactive waste. Spread it on his farm, then the cow grows the grass, the cows eat that, the cows get killed, and that stuff bioaccumulates obviously and stays in the food chain, so we don't want that to happen.
Would that answer Vince's concern?
No, because that's something different. We do answer Vince's concern, but we do that later. This isn't a liquid, it can be a muck, like a mud, but generally it's the drill cores, which are solid, and then the other stuff that comes up, we basically compress it, get the fluid out, we do something else with the fluid, and then they take it to Ohio, as I said, and then they, this is solid stuff as opposed to the liquid, the brine. Natural gas, that's a defined term. Methane and any gaseous substance, combustible or non-combustible, which is produced in a natural state from the earth, and which maintains the gaseous or rarefied state at standard temperature and pressure conditions, and or components or vapors occurring in or derived from petroleum or other hydrocarbons. That's just a straightforward definition. Okay, now we're getting into the meat of the definition. The next one, we're on page 8. Natural gas and or petroleum exploration activities. Geologic or geophysical activities related to the search for natural gas, petroleum, or other subsurface hydrocarbons, including prospecting, geophysical and geologic seismic surveying and sampling techniques, but only extent in this draft, that such activities involve or employ core, rotary, or any other type of drilling or otherwise making any penetration or excavation of any land or water surface in the search for an evaluation of nat gas, petroleum, or other subsurface hydrocarbon deposits. What should be noted about this definition is what's not covered. You don't want somebody, you don't want to simply say looking for this, and then somebody, what do they call those sticks that people used to use?
Dividing zones?
Yeah, so somebody can say, well, what's the impact of that? Well, there isn't it. But there's no, but we don't pick that up because it doesn't involve any kind of drilling or otherwise making penetration. The only thing that this doesn't pick up that some towns might want to pick up is basically the thumper trucks. You know what those are? Did you know?
Tell me, I don't.
So they go around, and I don't really understand the divider flavor in my house, and this is Helen's area, so I don't really know how it works. But basically, when part of how they look for stuff underground is they go through and they actually they park a big truck and they send like little mini sizing charges down. And I don't know what they're looking for, maybe it's a sonar, I don't know how it works, sonar or something. But I know that they basically are pounding the ground, they'll do it on the roads. A lot of towns don't want it on the roads. I don't know if that's paranoia or for real, I don't know enough about it. But this does not pick that up.
Why?
Because I don't like drafting stuff that I don't understand.
Okay. Would you
Yeah.
talk to your
Sure.
colleague
Yeah,
and see,
yeah.
after talking to her, if you think it's something we should know about?
Okay, yeah.
And what is it called?
Thumper trucks. And it's just what it sounds like, they thump the ground. And then, but I don't,
Is that separate from the seismic testing?
it's part of it. So if they're doing any of the other stuff, like that other seismic testing is, dynamite and things like that, underground, we pick it up because of the penetration and excavation. But, so it's part of that, but it's not necessarily as intrusive. But I'll get an answer so I can explain it to you guys. Okay, nat gas extraction activities is, that's basically what it sounds like. The digging or drilling of a well for the purpose of exploring for, developing, or producing nat gas, petroleum, or other subsurface hydrocarbons, including without limitation, any all forms of shale fraction. We don't want to focus simply on fracking, but there's no legal problem with the saying including without limitation.
Would this also include the Utica? Yeah, if it
We are
comes
not
up.
talking about forming,
Yeah.
we
Would you
don't
have to
believe
do?
you may do that. We think that that's, telling somebody the formation would be tantamount to telling them how, might be tantamount to telling them how down deep they can drill. And in the mineral mining context, that is clearly operations and processes. So that's why we don't want to go near that.
Yep, okay, just so we're covering.
Okay. All right, now we get to Vince's question. And this is, we're gonna end up with a concept called natural gas extraction, exploration, or production support activities. And that's where we're gonna lump all these other things together, the compressor stations, the land application facilities, and so forth. Though all of those are key to, in turn, key to the definition of natural gas and petroleum extraction, exploration, or production of wastes. So this is probably, this is clearly one of the most important, and I apologize, lengthy definitions in the document. So,
I'm sorry, David, before you jump into it, so you're saying that this is going to change to natural gas and petroleum extraction, exploration, or production waste support activities?
no, what I'm saying is that we're going to come down to a definition
Oh,
of
so
support activities.
okay, that covers those areas.
And working back, the support activities are going to be compression facilities, the non-regulated pipelines, the land application facilities, and so forth.
Gotcha.
And each of those, in turn, is tied to the definition of the waste.
Okay,
And so this is an important definition.
sure.
And it gets to where Vince was on the question of what happens if somebody takes a duck and says, we're not gonna call it a duck anymore. What we're saying is it's still a duck, no matter what you call it. So, here's the definition. Any of the following in any form, and whether or not such item.
Good, Vince.
Pardon?
Is that addressing the Halliburton loophole?
We picked that up on our definitions of underground injection. So that it doesn't specifically address it, but that's how we get it. They're basically exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act because of what they said they did and didn't do. I mean, that's how they got this to begin with the underground injection. We're picking up underground injection, whether or not, you know, they're exempting it from the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's fine. We want to separate and aside from whether it's exempted from the Safe Drinking Water Act. In our town, you can't do it as a land use. So it's addressed that way.
Okay.
All right. Any of the following in any form, and whether or not such items have been accepted or exempted from the coverage of any federal or state environmental protection laws, or have been accepted from statutory or regulatory definitions of industrial waste, hazardous or toxic, and whether or not such substances are generally characterized as waste. So we don't want somebody to come in and say, well, this isn't considered waste by the industry. It doesn't matter as we define it. It goes on how we define it, not what the industry says. So the first thing is below regulatory concern radioactive material. So in other words, we're picking up radioactive material that is below the thresholds these other guys